Hey everybody, welcome back to Mission Control, a podcast that's typically around nonprofit leaders and executive directors, but as you know, we're starting off this season a little bit differently by turning the mission by turning the control of the mission internally to UnoDeuce Multimedia as we celebrate 25 years of doing positive storytelling. And today, I'm going to bring on a guest who I've known for many, many years, but she's a friend, was a friend at first. However, she was also a client and one of my very first clients. So that's what's cool about the relationships that I've built over the years. But without further ado, I would like to welcome Jae to the show. Hey, Jae, how are you?
I am well. How are you doing?
Good. I really appreciate you joining me on this. And so it's been wild when I was putting together this season on who I wanted to bring on this show. You were immediately one of the first people I wanted to bring on because you had such a crucial part of the start of UnoDeuce and where we are. But before we get into that, folks may not know who you are and may not know that I know you. And so let's start there. Let's learn a little bit more about Jae. Who is Jae?
Wow. Well, Jae is a Caribbean islander who, have spent many, many years in the mainland doing medical stuff and then transitioning to community relations. And recently I'm an event producer, program manager for the Boys and Girls Club of Greater Detroit. But prior to that, that's a new role for me 2 months in. But prior to that, for 25 years, Claude was my client, and I helped them execute their community relations programming, not just in Southeastern Michigan, but across the country. Working with a number of outstanding nonprofits. I know that's near and dear to your heart. It's precious to me too. And so I've been very fortunate to work with those particular clients, to get to know a myriad of people and experience a number of different things that has led me to this point right here, into an amazing second career. I was at my previous company for 25 years, and I'm looking forward to spending some time with the Boys and Girls Club of Greater Detroit.
That's incredible because we here at UnoDeuce, we work with the Boys and Girls Club of Lansing. So that's a huge similarity. But how did you get started in that? I mean, not just Boys and Girls Club, but how did you get started in the public relation field? Where did that all come from?
So my degree is in sport management with public relations. And it was always my intent to, in pursuing that degree, and going into sport management, to use the resources of a sport organization to help the community. I know what it's like to need and to be deficient of certain things. And I wanted to alleviate others from that as much as I can and contribute to, society in that way. And so when I enrolled at Bowling Green State University for this degree, I set 2 goals for myself: graduate with honors, intern with the Pistons. And so I graduated honors and I interned with the Pistons. And that led me to the Detroit area. And I was very fortunate to have as an intern director someone who I think from, the experience I've had understood internship. She sat down and she asked, "What are you trying to get out of this?" And I told her I wanted to improve my writing skills and I wanted to improve my event management skills. And I would, at the time, the Pistons Community Relations Department was working on a program that allowed us to do just that. They were refurbishing parks in Detroit. They were dedicating the parks back to the community once they were all done. And so, I was writing press releases and communicating with, community organizations and working with community neighbors and posting their celebrations for the park. And so it just kind of built on that. And that experience allowed me to be hired into the company where I spent 25 years, starting off with PR coordinator for the Detroit Police Athletic League. And that just went on from, event management to program management to event productions. And then, like I mentioned, not just in Southeast Michigan, but across the country with Ford. And so it just kind of steamrolled from there. And so that's where it started, and that's what led me to where I am right now.
Well, that's interesting. So I forgot that you interned with the Pistons. It's about around the time when I met you.
Yes, David.
Yes. Yeah, my best man, for those who didn't know. Dave Dave introduced us, and I don't know how that connection happened there with you and him.
He was with the Pistons. And we would talk about sports and stuff like that. He says, what?
That's
He
right.
says, you would love my friend. You guys would get along so well. And he introduced us and we kicked it off. Not just
Oh,
with
I
sports,
know.
and of course with movies. And then, that's why I saw your passion. It's funny because, I follow you on LinkedIn and I hear all the stories and see all the things you're doing. And I always just smile internally and just outwardly. It's like, he's doing exactly what he said he wanted to do. And he's just making it happen. I'm always so incredibly proud that you're able to do that and you're doing it.
Oh, that's awesome. It's funny because that late '90s time is still a bit of a haze because I was learning so much. And then I transferred from the Detroit area out to Seattle and back, and so it was kind of like a blur. And I do remember we hung out quite a bit, and so it
Yeah.
was, yeah, we did hit it off. And yeah, it was cool that, and you actually brought it up before I get too lost in the weeds, is when I came back, you had started to do some work with the Detroit Police Athletic League, and that was what the first project that we worked on together, which I'll never forget. That was a good one, because so how again did you get connected to the Detroit Police Athletic League?
I was hired. I was hired by Campbell Marketing and Communications,
Okay.
and it's an agency. And one of their accounts was the Detroit Police Athletic League account, because one of their clients was on the board. So they needed someone to assist with public relations, and so I not only handled the public relations campaign, I also was a handler for the police of the year at the time. Sometimes I'd go to public engagements, charity previews, stuff like that. I try to build goodwill between the community and the officers, and communicate with the parents and those constituents. And so that's how that came to be. So the account that I was handed to me when I started working at the agency.
Well, I mean, that's awesome. And so in essence, it was great. It's like, what made you decide to reach out to me to do this video? Because you wanted to create this comprehensive video about the league, from the leadership on down. And what was, if you can remember? I mean, because it was over 20 years ago.
Yeah. I just remember you've always had a passion for that, right? You've always had a passion for that. And what was important, and I think sometimes it's lost in video production, is the story, right? But you always wanted to connect the story. And a
Mhm.
lot of times, although the lights and the camera and the action will get it, so the story is what's going to keep it, right? And so you were always really good at telling the story. You were very open to ideas. You came with ideas. You're very engaging. And I think those are the things that sold it for me just knowing you and understanding. And I can sense the passion that you had. It wasn't just, oh, I'm collecting this paycheck. It's like, I want to really, hit home with this video. And then, of course, the cause was resonated with you as well.
No, I thought I loved it. I thought that was one of the projects that, like I said, it was one of the very first big projects. In fact, I'll never forget talking with you, solidifying the contract, um, and starting to plan out what we wanted to do. I was sitting, I didn't even have my own apartment yet. I was sitting at my friend's table while I was waiting to get an apartment. And so it was like, I'll never forget that. And just talking with you about it, I was so excited about that. But it was a really cool project that we got to do in multiple locations. And then we got to meet the mayor of Detroit at that time. It was Kwame.
I mean, yeah. Mhm.
He was one of the on the spot interviews, as well as some other things. And then, um, but one of the things I'll never forget about it was that the deadline kept getting pushed because, do you remember this?
No, why did the deadline get pushed?
Well, the current chief of police was removed from office and they had to wait to bring in the new and we had to go and
Always
re-interview.
drama.
It was a lot.
Always drama.
Yeah.
It's always drama. But it's interesting because and it happens in my line of work. One of the things that is so critical is being able to just kind of roll with it, right? To go with it, to be flexible, to be understanding, to be, lenient at times. And so in doing the work that you do, I imagine that is is paramount, right? Because the times when it's going to line up like perfectly every time. Oh, I waited for that to happen, right? Best laid plans until the horn blows until it's game time and you're ready to rock and roll. But I remember those times as being an education for me too, because it was a chance to see someone work their craft in another industry that was totally new for me, and just kind of gaining an understanding of things, right? And to the point where, when I watched movies, and you and I have, watched a number of
Oh, yes.
movies and went to, we critiqued films with a Detroit
Yes.
theater, I looked at them through a different lens. And you gave me that appreciation or understanding of how to even look at things like that. So it was, partnering with you, being a friend, it was as much an education for me as the stuff that I was learning in my own job.
Well, and I think that it can be reciprocal because the simple fact is like I had you were so organized and like under control. I think sometimes you spoiled me a little bit by being a really good client. And, it was like, not that my clients are bad, but at the same time, it's like not everyone has that because nothing bothers you. You're like, oh, well, this is what happened. Let's just go. And so that taught me a little bit about understanding because you're right. Things don't always line up. And when I have conversations with my team and, conversations with interns coming up, I'm like, look, there's going to be gold nuggets when you have to be patient. We are actually inserting ourselves into people's lives, and sometimes it's not normal, and sometimes folks' schedule doesn't line up at the last second, and you just roll with it. You just have to understand that, that's part of the job. And that was one of those really cool learning moments for me early on in that regard. Being on my own and understanding, oh, well, I could be upset about this and just say, well, I drove all the way down here for this situation and it just didn't pan out, or it only lasted 5 minutes. But it's like, look, it's, then it's about observing what's going on, what's really happening, and understanding that from the story perspective. Yeah, I think Yeah, so it was a really cool, it was such a really one of those really cool first projects to have,
Mhm.
because of the fact that it was so many multiple moving parts that we were trying to capture, and because the police athletic league, I mean, it was multiple sports,
Right,
multiple precincts were involved, a lot of leadership. It was a very, like you mentioned, you know, it was a very well regarded organization. Um, I don't know if it still is. I haven't kept up with it, but you know, it was a really good first. I don't want to say first. It wasn't my first project, but it was one of
Mhm.
those really good early projects that showed a different facet, um, you know, and learning from that. So, yeah, that's really cool. And so now I remember, I'm going to call back to, you know, your internship conversation where you wanted to learn more about event management, you know, get better at that. So
Mhm.
was that something that you got better at over time as well?
Yeah, I would certainly say so because, my colleagues call me a make things happenologist. And it's to your point that I remember one time we were going to the NAACP convention in DC, my client and I, and when she arrived, I usually advanced her, and when she arrived, she said, the leader asked me, "Who is this Jae Margetson?" And my client's like, "Uh oh, what happened?" She's like, "No, she is persistent. She gets what," but it's because, to your point, I have a goal. I have an objective, mission, and whatever I need to do to accomplish that, I do, right? I'm persistent, I'm respectful, but it's very important to me to get the job done and to get it done well. And so over the years, yes, it started with the Pistons, but then you organize events for PAL, and then you organize events for Ford, and they, at that level, right, corporate and community, they're well-respected institutions. They have a level of standard because they're public facing that you have to, respect and maintain the integrity of. And so that raises your game, right? But I've always been, to your point, very organized and very put together. And I think funny because this is my second, career.
Uh-huh.
When I
Uh-huh.
started out working, I was 14 years old, and I worked in a medical laboratory, and I did that for a very long time. And through that, I learned to be discreet. I learned, professionalism. I learned to just accept people where they are because you're seeing people at all different aspects and phases of their lives in all different situations, right? And so it kind of gave me a sense of tolerance and resilience and just patience too. And then, and so even when you put all those factors together, it lend itself to, organizing events that, um, conferences for hundreds of people, or just a business meeting for 20, you know, going in. One time, my client, I was stopping by her office, and she's like, "What are you doing tomorrow?" And I was like, "Well, whatever you want me to do tomorrow." And so she says, "Great, go to New York and meet with this guy." And so I was like, "Okay, fine." So I went to New York, met with the guy, and then came back home. But it's just, whatever it took to get the job done and to get it done well. And I always used the following as my barometer, right? As success. Did the guest have a good time? Was my client pleased, right? Yes, there may be chaos going on in the background and everything's falling apart. But if the guests do not see that, or their experience wasn't affected by that, then I count that as a win. I'm making, note of what we could have done differently, or what we could have done better, or how we can level up next time. But, at the end of the day, the guests had a great time. I executed what the client's goals and objectives were. And that's a win. And because of that, I think I've, experienced success. And of course, the way you engage and work with people, I've met a number of different people over the years, to your point, dignitaries and celebrities and just everyday mom and pops. And I love that too, because, it boils down to us all being people, right? And so when you put all those vendors and guests and clients and just strangers that attend all together and make that your scope, it just crystallizes the action and the mission and how to accomplish that. And then you make that the priority. And when you make that the priority, then you want to really do your best.
I couldn't have said it better myself. But that, talking about all that really reminds me of another project that we worked on that will always stick with me. Was when you called me up and said, I need you to come work the Ford Freedom Awards.
Oh yeah.
And you're like, yeah, I want you to be Robin Roberts' personal videographer. And I was like, what? What do I do? You just follow her around. That's it. That was, I know we did some other Ford Freedom Award stuff, but that one
Mhm.
was one of those. It's one of those pinch me for a second because it was a lot of fun. And that was a good setup.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. When you're able to maintain your composure in the face of all of that, and then it gains you that experience, because then you learn how to engage with people at that level, right? And what their nuances were, and the extra level of security that you have to navigate, and the sensitivities that you have to be aware of. Then it ups your game too, right? And then it kind of gives you a perspective for next time, and how to deal with it. And of course, she comes with her own crew, so it was kind of strange. But then you get to see that level and that outside part of execution and that level. But yeah, it's amazing. The number of people that I've come across, and the work that the vendors, a lot of them you get to know as friends, because you're first, you work with me. But I always go back to the ones that perform, right? Because again, they understand it's shorthand, they know what you're looking for, they know what to expect. But then the quality of work that they produce for you speaks for itself too. And so when you're engaging with people at that level, like a Robin Roberts, you have to seek out your best, right? Because you only have one shot at that.
Yes.
And their level, because they've been around it. I mean, she's a journalist. She's been in this industry for many, many years. It has to be top notch. And you kind of lean on those friends and those vendors and those relationships that you have, that will be able to put on a peak performance for you, even with video production.
No, and I thought, and she was a gem. She really was. I mean, luckily for me, I had an opportunity a few years before, while working the Super Bowl, is to be in the midst of what that whole rigmarole would be like, and then just to be assigned to her, just to follow her as she took that journey in discovering the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History and
Yeah,
capturing
yeah.
her her response to that, and her engaging with the folks that are there. And that
Mhm.
was that was that was a fun gig. And man, like I said, it's another one that will always, I don't even remember what year that was. I just remember the time I had. It was like
Yeah.
2009 or something like
I think
that.
it was a nine, or it had to have been
And
around there, because I remember my very first Ford Freedom Award was Al Jarreau.
oh
Um,
wow.
I know, right? And it's crazy because I was like, oh my God, it's Al Jarreau, but but he was just so down to earth and just so appreciative. And,
Yeah.
he got the kids all singing in unison. And first they were like, what is he doing? Because, he does like kind of the kind of bop kind of thing. But soon they were all engaged in it. And yeah, it's been, I've been extremely fortunate over the years to have been in a number of different situations because of Ford that I would never, encounter or expected. To the point where I remember the first time I went to the Grammys, I was telling my mom, she's
Mm.
like, "You're going to the Grammys?" And I was like, "Yeah." She says, "Are you going to meet LL Cool J?"
Well,
And
he's
I was
there.
like, doubt it. And she says, "Well, if you meet him, tell him I said he is sexy." And I was like, "Mom, you're 77." She's like, "He is sexy." So if you ever meet LL, just let him know he can still pull it, and he can pull it at any age.
Yeah. Well, if I ever meet him. So
I never did.
I
I
actually
just,
did a good. I have seen him live. He performed
mm,
here in Lansing at one of a former music festival that we had here. So I got a chance to see him up close and personal. I mean, it was, and I'll tell you, his energy level. He didn't stop for an hour. He went an
wow.
hour straight,
Uh-huh.
song to song. If it might even been longer than that, it might have been 90 minutes. But he didn't take a break. He didn't stop until the set was done.
Right, right.
I'm like, this dude's
Amazing.
older than me. I mean, I'm not that much older, but older than me. And I'm just like, I'm just amazed at, I was like, wow, what a
I
good
imagine the
performance.
audience probably just kept him energized, right? Because from what I was told, they feed off of that energy. They can feel it, right? And I can certainly imagine that
Hmm.
had something
Hmm.
to play with, had some part to play in it.
The crowd was going crazy. He performed well. So tell me a little bit while we have a little bit of time, what you're into now. You said you just started working with the Boys and Girls Club of
Of Greater
Detroit.
Detroit. Uh-huh. It used to be
Um,
Boys and Girls of Southeast Michigan, and now they've changed to
okay.
Greater Detroit. And so I'm their VP of Special Events and Projects.
Okay.
Um, Working on events that can be as small as a reception,
Yep.
which we're doing this weekend, as a matter of fact, to Metro Detroit Youth Day. It's a 41-year-old community event focused on Belle Isle, that is changing of the guards. The founder passed away, unfortunately, last fall. And in doing so, the family wanted to continue that 41-year legacy, right? The father
Mm.
just put his heart into it. He was recognized nationally for this, Mr. Ed Deeb. And so they reached out, they vetted some community organizations, and they asked the Boys and Girls Club, "Hey, can we entrust you with this project and take it further?" And in classic Boys and Girls fashion, Sean Wilson, our CEO and president, he's always looking to reimagine and do something bigger and better. So that's what we're doing this year. We're taking it from a 1 day event on Belle Isle to a 5 day event, excuse me, at 6 different locations across Metro Detroit, right? Hoping to engage anywhere from 10 to 15,000 youth. On Belle Isle, 6,000 by itself. And so my responsibility is to make sure that partnership with those organizations, Eastern Market, Michigan Central, the Riverfront Conservancy, the City of Detroit, Joe Louis Greenway Partnership, all of those entities, we're all moving together in one direction to execute this event on behalf of the city's youth, come August, right? So it's controlling branding, it's, leading committee meetings, it's, handling this extreme amount of logistics, procurement, staffing, volunteering, all that stuff, just making sure that all of those cylinders are working. And then we have a great event for the kids come August 11th through 15th. So that's what I do. That's what I'm doing first, for work. As I mentioned, I'm new to Boys and Girls Club, but my client, the president of the Boys and Girls Club, he was a former client at Ford. So I just happened to run
Mhm.
into him at a dance theater of Harlem when he was in town, catching up. And he knew that I was doing contract work, and he reached out because he had a need. And I was like, "Hey, um, I can help you in any way you can." And he had a opening, and he's like, "Hey, come on board and just help us get events to where I know we can be and where we should be. And so I'm helping them lead that charge, helping us lead that charge.
Awesome. Well, Jay, this has been really wonderful. Really appreciate you coming on the podcast and walking down memory lane with me and just having some of the, the great memories that we created together over these past years. But I really appreciate you taking some time out to do that.
Well, I'm glad you reached out. And you know what? I said this earlier, but I just wanted to underscore this. You were always working at your craft, right?
Right.
Whether you did it professionally or when we were doing the film theater or doing being juries for films. I
I
don't know if you
forgot
remember.
about that.
Yeah, I don't remember that. We were like you of Dearborn,
Yeah.
judging film, and you were always working at the craft. And I think it's just a tribute to how you've been able to for 25 years just keep getting better and better and honing and just expanding your horizons and your capabilities and of course your clientele base. I'm so proud of you. Every time I hear your name or see your face on, I just smile because I'm like, man, he was always working at it. And that's what happens, right? You were never complacent that I saw. And you just kind of worked on your craft professionally and personally. And I think it speaks to 25 years, the silver anniversary.
I know. It's hard to believe, but I appreciate you. Thank you. And we'll
Welcome.
hopefully connect really soon. All
Yeah.
right.
Thank
Well,
you.
take care.
All right.
All right.
Bye.
And thank you, everybody, for tuning in to another edition of Mission Control. Don't forget to subscribe on all your podcast platforms or wherever you can find it. Or if you have any questions about this program and how we typically run it, because we typically talk to nonprofit executive directors about their journey, but we're turning the camera on UnoDeuce this time around. So you can connect with us at missioncontrol@unodeuce.com. And until and the next episode, we'll be talking to Vance Blackfox, who is another friend and colleague and client that led me down a different path as well and taught me a lot of stuff as we both grew into our roles. So stay tuned for that episode coming out in a couple weeks. And until that time, we'll see you next time at the Control Center.